Chapter 996, Card Game. After entering the East Balaam military veterans' mess, Klein handed his cane and hat to his valet, Inuni, only to see Colonel Calvin of the Lowen Kingdom's Ministry of Defense wearing an army uniform, waiting at the foyer with a glass of red wine in hand. This long-faced officer smiled as he raised his cup at Dwayne Dantes.
Long time no see.
It really has been a while.
Klein smiled as he walked over. Colonel Calvin immediately offered his right hand.
Congratulations. You did pretty well. Everyone was very pleased.
I was very pleased as well.
Klein used a Lowen-styled euphemism to express his pleasure in cooperating. He then shook hands with him. Calvin retracted his arm and glanced at Mocht before he said with a laughing sigh,
Back when you first introduced Dwayne, I was quite distrustful of your judgment, but now I understand how you're a member of Parliament.
Anyone who interacts with Dwayne can easily tell that he's an expert at this.
Mocht accepted the colonel's approbation with the same Lowen-styled euphemism. Calvin retracted his gaze, sipped some red wine, and smiled at Dwayne Dantes, asking in passing,
How much did you earn this time? Don't worry, I won't raise prices in the future because of it. I'm simply curious.
20,000 pounds in gold.
Klein gave the midpoint value as an answer. In actual fact, he had earned 25,000 pounds, but after paying Miss Messenger 10,000 pounds for her services, he had only earned 15,000 pounds. Calvin nodded.
Not bad. If you need to convert those gold bars into gold coins, I can introduce you to someone from an imperial mint factory.
How was it? Did you notice anything abnormal around May Sanchez's area? Yes, there was a place called Revival Square under his control that was destroyed by lightning.
Klein said directly without thinking.
That I'm aware of.
Calvin replied with a rather heavy expression.
But you probably do not know that the person before you was the one who created the lightning.
Klein smiled and then said,
Also, May Sanchez seems to be maintaining a fragile balance among many factions, but in actual fact, he has already secretly aligned himself with a particular faction. Of course, I'm not exactly sure who it is.
He had no intention of betraying the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. All he did was divulge a little to win the trust of the Lowen military.
The only thing that can be confirmed is that it isn't us.
Calvin nodded and said with a deep look in his eyes,
It's unlikely to be Intis.
Klein helped him eliminate one of the wrong choices. Calvin tersely acknowledged.
That isn't a bad thing either. The few factions surrounding May Sanchez are supported by Intis. If he wishes to expand, there's no way he can circumvent them. When the time comes, perhaps we will have more arms sales on our hands.
With that said, he offered a toast.
Holy Lord of Storms, to riches for everyone.
As believers of the Evernight goddess, Klein and Mocht smiled in response without giving a direct answer. After taking another sip of red wine, Calvin pointed at the second floor.
Dwayne, I brought you here today to play cards with a VIP, Texas Hold'em.
Which VIP?
Klein asked with piqued interest. Calvin's expression turned solemn as he said with an unobvious smile,
Admiral Emerius. He has been given a post and is currently in charge of the Ministry of Defense.
Admiral Emerius. The admiral, whose younger brother was stripped of his post as Governor General, had his mistress corrupted by the Mother Tree of Desire and ended up losing his post as highest commander of the Central Sonia Seas Navy. I've worked with him before and even pretended to be him for some time. Indeed, when it comes to a demigod, as long as they didn't screw up too badly, and if they are willing to hold it in, they will always be able to step out of the nadir.
Klein recalled everything that had happened at Oravi Island, turning wistful. Towards Admiral Emerius Revelt, he still felt some guilt towards him. Although most of what happened back then didn't have anything to do with him, his mistress's anomaly was ultimately a result of the Mother Tree of Desire's wish to control him.
That is to say that our future cooperation requires His Excellency's approval?
Klein asked in enlightenment.
That's how it is.
Calvin nodded and pointed up the stairs.
Let's head on up.
When they arrived at the second floor, they stopped in front of a pair of dark red double doors. Calvin turned his head to glance at Dwayne Dantes.
Your mission today is to lose money.
Lose money.
Klein sized up Calvin as he curled the ends of his mouth.
I'll try my best.
By the side, Mocked said, with a laugh.
There's actually no need to be too deliberate. Admiral Emirius has excellent card-playing skills. It's almost impossible if you wish to win any money. Heh. I always lose. Sigh. I just hope I won't lose too much today. Otherwise, I wouldn't even dare to return home.
Klein nodded thoughtfully.
I only brought 200 pounds in cash. Would that be enough?
Definitely not.
Calvin chuckled.
I've already changed chips worth 1,000 pounds for you. Just remember to return it.
Lowen's best lawyers only earn about 1,000 pounds a year on the surface. You bunch of profligates.
Klein sized up Calvin again. This colonel didn't notice it as he knocked on the door. Melis Spliaka. After a while, the double door creaked open, revealing the scene inside. It was a hall paved with thick, soft carpets. There wasn't a lot of furniture, making it appear rather spacious. In the middle of the hall was a card table that could accommodate more than 10 people. Surrounding it were luxurious-styled high-back chairs. By the sides of the hall were gold-plated cutlery, marble-carved sculptures, coffee tables with books and newspapers, and a series of leather sofas. Klein looked over and saw Emirius Revelt sitting at the seat of honor. This admiral didn't look different from before. His black hair was neatly combed backward, with his blue eyes dark and profound. The corners of his lips drooped slightly, and his face was clean-shaven. He had an austere temperament, and he wore dark blue clothes with an epaulet. He was meticulous in every detail, appearing extremely serious. When he swept his gaze, Klein found another familiar person. He had thick but neat black brows, with a short and hard crew cut of the same color. He had dark blue eyes and a high nose bridge with a bushy mustache spreading out from his mouth. He had a long face with accentuated outlines as well as callous curves. He was MI9's deputy director, Cronus Kilgore. He was one of the targets for Klein's return to Backland. He was the middleman in the dealings between the demonist sect and a particular faction in the royal family. He was one of the accomplices of the Great Smog of Backland. This brigadier general had abnormally broad shoulders, making his white shirt and black vest abnormally tight. He was playing Texas Hold'em with great focus.
There are 2, no, 3 demigods at a card table. How can this even be played? Interesting.
Klein sat down and began observing the others at the table. During this process, an attendant delivered a huge stack of chips worth a total of 1,000 pounds. In the first few rounds, Klein folded after looking at his cards. He acted very cautiously, acting as though he never called or raised unless he had good cards. As for Admiral Emirius, his style was the complete opposite of him. He was in no way conservative. He called almost every round, constantly raising in an extremely aggressive manner. Every round that he was involved in seldom reached the point where everyone showed their cards. Most people failed to withstand such aggression, and, with the Admiral's domineering force, they would call a round or two before folding. At times, someone would attempt to call Emirius Revelt's bluff, only to encounter 4 nines. The color in his face instantly drained as though he had been passed the death verdict by a judge. Chez Epoch. Cronus Kilgore had a completely different style as well. He would occasionally lose a round, but the chips lost wouldn't be much, preventing him from having too great a loss. And in the next round after his loss, he would often be able to wipe out the person who won all his chips the previous round, forcing him to spend money to buy in again.
Is there a need? Why are you using powers to cheat when dealing with low and mid-sequence beyonders or even ordinary people? Others might not be able to tell, but would I be fooled? One has the Arbiter Pathway's dominance, and the other has the Baron of Corruption's bribe.
Klein looked at his 5 of hearts and 9 of clubs as he shook his head indiscernibly. He couldn't help but consider which powers of a seer pathway could provide him help if he wanted to cheat.
Turn all my opponents into marionettes? In that case, I can win as much as I want. I'm practically invincible, but it's of no pragmatic value. It's not like I'm planning for some deathmatch poker tournament. Unfortunately, there aren't any mosquitoes here. Otherwise, I can use their spirit body threads and turn them into marionettes to help me check out their hole cards. Faceless only allows me to change myself, not the cards. Magician's illusion? The effects would likely be pretty good when playing with ordinary people or low and mid-sequence beyonders. But there are two demigods here. Use a clown's ability to swap cards. It's useless. The dealing and shuffling of cards are done by the croupier.
As his thoughts raced, Klein realized that apparently only his powers as a seer was of use here. He threw out his two hole cards to indicate a fold before taking out a metal chip and allowing it to move between his fingers. At this moment, Amirius Revelt suddenly looked up at him and retracted his hands before pushing all his chips in.
Indeed.
Klein nodded inwardly without a hint of surprise. During his last cooperation, he knew that Admiral Amirius was able to distinguish ordinary people from Beyonders from his position. He suspected that he could even determine a Beyonder's level, or in other words, their position. However, Klein wasn't too worried, because a Bizarro sorcerer had concealment powers to a certain degree. This was also why he could converge the augmentation effect the gray fog had on him after he reached Sequence 4. This made him confident that Amirius wouldn't be able to determine his level. However, he didn't attempt any corresponding interference, as he suspected that Amirius was able to tell that he was a Beyonder. Therefore, he decided to reveal a tiny problem, making it easy to be seen through and be grasped. Chapter 997, Gambling God Dwayne. The core rules of Texas Hold'em were very simple. It was to use 2 hole cards and 5 community cards to form a hand with any 5-card combination. Whoever had the biggest hand won, and the community cards were dealt in 3 phases. 3 community cards to form the flop in the first phase, a 4th community card called the turn in the second phase, and a 5th community card called the river in the third phase. Each phase allowed players to fold, check, call, or raise. This continued until everyone was done or until one person didn't fold. Klein fiddled with the chip in his hand as he divined the existence of any lucky instances within the next few rounds. However, he was unable to tell which exact round it was. After all, it was only a quick and simple divination with average effects.
Using this method to play with ordinary people and low-sequence beyonders wouldn't be a problem as long as the correct strategy is used, but it's definitely inadequate against demigods. It's already quite a challenge to defeat a mid-sequence beyonder. Must I close my eyes each round and do a complete dream divination? Heh. If that were the case, Dwayne Dantes might end up with the title Sleeping Gambling God.
Klein sighed inwardly. He continued watching the round play out as he sat by the side. At present, he had already lost a big blind and a small blind when it was his turn. At this moment, Klein noticed one point. The MI9 Deputy Director, Cronus Kilgore, had lost 20 pounds to Admiral Amirius.
A successful bribe. Admiral Amirius should be able to tell that Cronus is using his powers as a baron of corruption, but he might not know that this MI9 Deputy Director is a demigod. The next round will be interesting.
Klein jolted to attention as the new round began. He didn't check his hole cards when the croupier handed him 2 new ones. Instead, he placed the metal chip he was playing with in his hand onto his hole card, taking on the stance of not planning to look at them. After 2 people folded, the stern and old-fashioned Amirius Revelt casually took a look at his hole cards. After counting 5 pounds worth of chips, he threw it into the middle of the table, having raised the stakes without garnering any surprises. Another person folded as Macht called. Right on the heels of that, Cronus Kilgore, who had an unyielding personality, raised the stakes, throwing out a total of 20 pounds. Calvin confirmed his hole cards once again before calling, Bacca. After one last person folded, Dwayne Dantes didn't do an actual count. He grabbed a handful of chips and threw it out. The croupier who was in charge of counting the chips glanced at it before precisely announcing Dwayne's action.
20 pounds. Call.
I thought it would be 50 pounds. From the looks of it, I'm still not very used to these chips. The white side burned, Dwayne Dantes, with an outstanding temperament, said with a laugh. However, he didn't add on the additional 30 pounds. At this moment, no one made a move. It was Amirius Revelt's turn again. This admiral didn't even glance at the remaining players, Picking up 5 10-pound chips, he threw them out.
Another raise.
He didn't show any perturbations in his emotions, acting as though he was ordering a cup of black tea. However, that indescribable sense of dominance and the act of repeatedly raising the stakes pre-flop made the mood at the table freeze. Such situations often implied that Admiral Amirius had excellent hole cards. Perhaps they were a pair of aces, or a pair of kings, or an ace and king. Mocked decided to fold. Conas Kilgore rubbed his high-nosed bridge and glanced around with his dark blue eyes before saying,
Call.
Colonel Calvin confirmed his cards again. After 10 seconds of hesitation, he chose to fold. Dwayne Dantes touched the metal chip on his 2-hole cards and smiled. Call. After a round of expressing their intentions, there were only 3 players for the round. Then the croupier flipped the 3 community cards in the middle of the table for the flop. 2 spades, 9 hearts, king spades. The person who was up first was Admiral Amirius Rivelt. He leaned forward slightly and said in a domineering manner,
50 pounds.
He had immediately raised the stakes to 50 pounds. Mocked, Calvin and company, including those who weren't in the game, felt stifled for some baffling reason. Cunas Kilgore trembled slightly, but he ultimately grabbed 50 pounds and threw it out. Dwayne Dantes glanced at the deputy director of MI9. Completely unfazed by the pressure, he said with a smile, Call. Upon hearing this, Calvin turned his head and nodded at Dwayne Dantes with his deep blue eyes that resembled a nighttime lake, indicating his approval. From his point of view, Admiral Amirius's domineering stance didn't affect a person who came to lose money. At this moment, the red-vested croupier revealed the 4th card, the turn. 9 spades. There were 3 spades, increasing the chances of a flush tremendously. However, Admiral Amirius still didn't hesitate. He calmly pushed a stack of chips.
100 pounds.
Conas Kilgore's fingers tapped on his hole cards, showing his lack of confidence. But ultimately, he chose to call. Dwayne Dantes glanced at this deputy director once again and maintained his warm smile. Call. At this point in time, he had yet to see his hole cards, making Calvin somewhat worried. He believed that such an act was going overboard, a clear act of throwing money away. It wasn't something Admiral Amirius, who was relatively conservative, might find acceptable. At this moment, the red-vested croupier revealed the final card, the river. 2 clubs. As such, the community cards took form. 2 spades, 9 hearts, king spades, 9 spades, 2 clubs.
200 pounds.
Admiral Amirius pushed a pile of metal chips in with an extremely domineering attitude. Conas Kilgore took a deep breath before pushing 2 stacks of chips.
500 pounds.
This amount of money was half of his purported annual salary. Is he trying to bluff? Calvin and Mocked exchanged looks, believing that Brigadier General Kilgore had made it too obvious, making it easy to see through him. One had to know that when playing Texas Hold'em, apart from doing risk management and probability calculations, it also involved psychological battles most of the time. Be it in terms of body language, expression, or the style used for raises, they made it easy to expose one's hidden cards. Of course, good players could also use these details to deliberately misdirect their opponents. Dwayne Dantes sized up Cunas Kilgore before he laughed. Then, like the previous few times, he said, Call. Amirius raised his hands, prepared to push all his remaining chips to pressure his opponents into folding. At this moment, he suddenly paused. His deadpan expression wore a look of solemnity. Chaife firma, Hamir Treshen. After a few seconds of silence, he calmly said,
Call.
At this point, the hole cards could be revealed to compare each person's hand. Admiral Amirius flipped his card first. It was an ace spades and 10 spades. It formed a flush with the 2 spades, king spades, and 9 spades. It was a rather high-ranking hand, with the only ones bigger than it being a full house. 4 of a kind, straight flush, and royal flush.
It's your turn.
Amirius then urged Cunas. Cunas first flipped open a single card, king diamonds. It made 2 pairs with the king and 9 from the community cards. Following that, he picked up his second whole card. At that moment, the remaining poker cards at the red-vested croupier's end blurred. Pa! The whole card was flipped open, revealing itself 9 clubs.
What?
Mocked and company exclaimed, hardly believing their eyes. This meant that Quonas Kilgore had obtained a full house, 9s over kings. It was bigger than a flush?
Sorry about that. Full house.
Quonas looked at Emirius and said with a smile. Then he turned to look at Dwayne Dantes.
You can reveal your cards.
I'm also very curious as to what my cards are. Dwayne Dantes smiled. He picked up the metal chip that he had placed down on his cards and very casually flipped the 2 whole cards.
What?
Calvin and company rubbed their eyes. Dwayne Dantes's whole cards were a very weak pair, 2 hearts, 2 diamonds. There happened to be a very small pair in the community cards, 2 spades, 2 clubs. They formed a 4 of a kind, the smallest rank when it came to 4 of a kind, but it was higher ranked than all the full houses. Praise the lady! Dwayne Dantes drew the crimson moon across his chest in pleasant surprise, looking as though he had never expected it.
An interesting round.
Emirius was taken aback for a moment before he gently clapped. Quonas Kilgore gave Dwayne Dantes a deep look and said with a laughing sigh,
I never expected the final winner to be you.
Klein wiped the smile from his face as he inwardly grumbled.
It's only right that I win over the 2 of you. On the one hand, Admiral Emirius enjoys pressuring others and doesn't really rely on his Beyonder powers to cheat. As for you, you placed your focus and Beyonder powers on Admiral Emirius, thus ignoring me. On the other hand, the one playing cards with you is actually named winner Inuni. Without even looking at his whole cards, it was obvious that he was relying solely on luck.
At the moment he placed his chip on the whole cards, Klein had already swapped positions with Inuni as they switched faces with each other. Although Colonel Calvin had gotten him to deliberately lose 1,000 pounds, Klein decided to win a killing after he saw Quonas Kilgore. This wasn't because he couldn't bear to part with the money. Instead, his main motive was to garner the attention of this MI9 demigod. He wanted to get familiar with him and build relationships. Only by doing this could Klein have an opportunity to obtain intelligence from Quonas Kilgore and even carry out an assault on him. After all, he was a demigod. To deal with him in Backland required sufficient care and caution. He would rather give up an operation if he lacked the confidence to guarantee a kill or lure him away from Backland. Otherwise, he was bound to expose himself, ending up being surrounded by demigods and even angels in Backland. In the subsequent rounds, Klein won and lost different rounds. In the end, not only did he keep his 1,000 pounds in chips, but he had even won nearly an additional 1,000 pounds. During this process, Calvin had gestured to Dwayne Dantes to lose, but he was left stupefied by the latter's ridiculous good luck that left him undefeatable. After the game came to an end, a person walked over to Dwayne Dantes with a smile, Quonas Kilgore. Chapter 998, Establishing Relations. With dark blue eyes, Quonas Kilgore, who had crew-cut hair which was seldom seen among members of high society, held a cup of champagne as he walked up to Dwayne Dantes. He said with a smile,
You had great luck today. You also had plenty of courage.
If he's referring to me immediately folding after receiving a bribe, with me rather losing a big blind, that's not luck but knowledge. As for the other times, playing cards with all of you has pretty much drained all of Inuni's recently accumulated good luck.
Klein swirled the cup with pale golden alcohol in his hand and said with a laughing sigh,
For a person who doesn't care about the outcome, there's naturally nothing to fear. Praise the lady.
He was using a Lowen-style euphemism to indicate that he was mainly here to lose money and that his good luck was all thanks to the blessings of a deity. It had nothing to do with himself. Quonas hadn't lost much tonight, approximately 100 to 200 pounds. Although this was already a considerable amount when compared to his purported salary, to a brigadier general deputy director of MI9, a hidden demigod, His salary was the most trivial part of his income. Therefore, he didn't mind it. He shook his head with a smile.
Humans often have no way of seeing through the arrangement of fate. You are an interesting person. It's a pleasure to meet you.
His final sentence was both a form of praise and also a part of the formalities. It indicated that their conversation was over. However, Klein had acted all night to acquaint himself with this demigod of the Black Emperor pathway, so how could he give up? He first replied,
It's my pleasure as well.
Then he asked in a seemingly random manner,
Your Excellency, are you familiar with the manors in the backland suburbs? It's best if they come with forests for hunting.
According to the information Klein had received from Miss Justice, Kionis Kilgore didn't enjoy holding banquets, balls, or saloons at his place. Neither did he accept invitations on such matters. It was unknown if it was a problem with his character or due to his job. He had very simple hobbies. First, he enjoyed smoking cigars, especially chieftain cigars from East Balem's Micant, recognized as the best cigars in the world. Second, he enjoyed playing cards, especially Texas Hold'em. Third, he enjoyed hunting. He often headed to the backland suburbs during autumn and winter. He even headed to Alwa County, or East Chester County, for hunting. Klein was already planning on buying a manor, an expenditure meant solely to integrate himself into high society. He hadn't made any decisions yet, but after meeting Kionis Kilgore today, he suddenly added this request in a bid to garner his interest. When the time came, he could even invite this MI9 deputy director to hunt in the suburbs over an enjoyable weekend. He could then seek out an opportunity to take action. Kionis Kilgore drank a mouthful of champagne and said after some thought,
I'll help you take note of it. If there's anything suitable, I'll send someone over. Bauckland Street, right? Yes, someone will inform you there.
Klein earnestly replied.
Thank you very much.
At the same time, he pitied his former valet, Richardson, who had now become an assistant butler. This young man who wished to better himself recently went out early in the morning and returned late at night. He had been gathering information about manors in backland suburbs, filtering out those that met the requirements and the ones which were on sale. He had been personally visiting them in a bid to list down options which were all flawless. He didn't wish for his employer to spot something he fancied only to find out that it wasn't for sale, or that the actual conditions were far worse what was described. And after Klein suddenly changed his request, all the work that Richardson had done was undoubtedly made useless.
The all-evil Party A in contracts always changes their requirements and requests. Yes, after this is done, I'll get Taneja to raise his annual salary by £5. As an assistant butler, he should naturally earn more than his time as a valet. £5. It was gone in just 1 or 2 raises in today's game. Richardson's annual salary is only enough to play a few rounds of Texas Hold'em.
Klein sighed inwardly when he sensed eyes looking at him. He directly looked back and realized that it was Admiral Amirius Rivelt. This old-fashioned and stern middle-aged man nodded gently and retracted his gaze. He had no intentions of communicating with Dwayne Dantes, nor did he get anyone to arrest this unaffiliated beyonder. After all, he was considered a working partner of the military, and it wasn't rare for a merchant, an adventurer with wide connections, to be able to obtain a potion. At this moment, Colonel Calvin and Member of Parliament Mocked walked over to Dwayne Dantes with wine glasses in hand. Calvin asked with an exasperated and suppressed voice,
What happened?
As Dwayne Dantes had won nearly £1,000, he and Mocked had to change their strategies to prevent Admiral Amirius from losing any money. They went from a tight strategy to an unrestrained one. They felt quite the pinch from losing several £100s each. As such, adding to everyone's losses, Admiral Amirius had won a total of nearly £300. Right. With regards to this, Klein spread his hands.
I didn't even look at my whole cards.
In between the lines, he meant that this was simply the blessings of some deity that controlled luck. At the moment, the deities, angels, and secret existences who had authority in the fate domain included, but were not limited to, the Evernight Goddess, the Fool, Snake of Mercury Will Septon, Pales Zoroast, Blasphemer Amon, and Snake of Fate Ouroboros.
This is really such a vexing matter.
Mock said with a bitter smile while shaking his head.
Calvin and I don't even dare to return home after what we've lost.
They had roughly lost about half their purported annual income. Dwayne Dantes, with grayed sideburns, revealed a surprised look.
When did you guys lose?
He then pointed at the pile of chips at his seat.
I just happened to retain the 1,000 pounds I bought in at the beginning. The rest are yours, isn't that so?
Calvin and Mock were taken aback as they exchanged looks. Then they revealed smiles.
We must have counted wrongly due to the anxiety.
Calvin gave an approving nod. Klein laughed and immediately changed the topic. He then began looking at supper that was placed on the coffee table beside him. City of Silver, in the spire of one of the Twin Towers. Derek Berg once again met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. Colin, who had quite a number of old scars on his face, calmly asked the youth who wasn't considered too tall.
You said that you have something you would like to ask me about.
Derek bowed and replied frankly,
Yes, Your Excellency. In the advancement for Priest of Light, I need pure darkness, but once I do it, it will be extremely dangerous. I'm wondering if there are any solutions.
Colin Iliad listened seriously before nodding.
You have to confirm one point. Is it pure darkness or darkness with zero light? These two concepts are very different. Kite BTs, if it's the latter, you can obtain that in the Spire's underground dungeons. You've been there for some time, so you should know what I'm talking about.
Derek had a deep fear for the Spire's dungeons because it was there that he first met Blasphemer Amon. Not only did he see the former captain of the expedition team, but he had even been parasitized. Unless it was necessary, he really didn't wish to recall it. At this moment, after receiving the chief's reminder, he began to slowly jolt his memories. He discovered that, under the spire, although each cell was given candles, one would have to wait for the guards to deliver food and medicine and ask for more once they finished burning. This didn't happen frequently, with it happening only thrice a day, with the gaps in between being very long. And in such an environment, phenomena like the appearance of monsters and the vanishing of humans never appeared. Derek recalled that he had been in darkness with zero light for some time, without encountering any danger. He pondered for a moment and hesitantly said,
The darkness with zero light at the bottom of the spire has external powers involved.
It was this power that prevented the darkness from making people disappear or producing monsters. Colin Iliad looked at the two swords that were hung up in a cross-like fashion on the wall. He looked up and sighed.
Yes, that's why it's called darkness with zero light, not pure darkness.
Derek frowned slightly as he tried to recall. After a few seconds, he said without certainty,
If that's the case, the darkness outside the spire's basement isn't pure darkness as well. In many historical records, the nights before the Dark Ages didn't make people vanish or produce monsters. Now, the darkness must have undergone an abnormal change or had some other forces mixed into it to turn it dangerous.
Not bad. For you to make such connections shows that you've improved. Therefore, let me ask you again. Do you need pure darkness or darkness with zero light?
Could it be that pure darkness only exists outside the forsaken land of the gods?
Derek turned gloomy before he pumped himself up.
Your Excellency, I'm not too sure either. I'll take some time to confirm this.
He believed that the experienced and strong Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. World, and the other members of the Tarot Club could give him a good solution. Colin Iliad didn't ask further, as he said with a nod,
Go on then. Once you reach Sequence 5, even if you aren't able to become a demigod for a long period of time, you will have the chance of wielding certain sealed artifacts.
Backlund Hilston Shio changed into a brown jacket and wore a cap, pretending to be a very ordinary short man. She had officially taken the commission and had begun tailing and investing the gentleman named Ernest Boyar. There were also a few other bounty hunters who participated in this mission. Ernest Boyar lifted his top hat and pointed his cane forward as he instructed the carriage driver.
To St. George Borough.
It was southeast of Backlund. separated from Eastborough by the Tussock River. Once he got on his carriage and took his seat, Ernest sniffed. He looked out the window and suddenly grunted. As a sanguine viscount, how could he not have discovered the clumsy bounty hunters tailing him? Chapter 999, Instigation. When Ernest left on a carriage, the few bounty hunters hiding in the vicinity immediately appeared. Without being stingy about the costs involved, they immediately stopped any rental carriages that passed by. Some memorized the target carriage's traits and attempted to take shortcuts through the cramped, isolated paths to catch up to it. Others rode on the bikes they had prepared ahead of time, swerving through the crowds and carriages with their bells ringing. It was very easy for them to keep pace. Among them, only Shio was completely composed. She remained in her spot, watching Ernest and her peers leave.
This transportation tool known as a bicycle is more useful than I imagined. It's no wonder so many bounty hunters have saved up to buy one. This can save expenses from taking carriages and save time walking. If one often has such tracking missions, then the money saved is enough to buy a brand new bike. The only problem is that this mode of transportation tool has very few models available. All of them have high seats.
Shio was enticed. At this moment, a tracked carriage drove over from the crossroads and stopped in front of her. Shio happened to be at a station. Glancing at the double-decker that stopped on the iron tracks, Shio took out a few pennies, walked over, and sat down by the window. Such public carriages could seat nearly 50 people with its double decks. It wasn't too crowded, allowing Shio to easily observe the scenery outside. However, she didn't admire the scenery. Her mind was quickly outlining the exact appearance of her target: brown hair, red eyes, pronounced features, a nose bridge that was so high that it looked deformed, and an oil painting catalog in hand. With her supernatural senses as a sheriff, as well as the distance between them not being too great, Shio could vaguely grasp her target's current location and predetermined destination. Therefore, she remained very calm and even took off her cap while using the glass windows to tidy up her coarse and stubborn blonde hair. After several stations, Shio suddenly got up when the public carriage came to a stop as she alighted. This was the Backland Bridge area. She had sensed that the target had already changed direction and was preparing to head towards the bridge. Shio immediately went on foot, planning to enter another street at the bend up ahead to board the public carriage that headed for the south bank of the Tussock River. She had good luck, with a public carriage driving over just as she arrived at the stop. Shio silently exhaled and took out another batch of pennies she had prepared. Her urge to buy a bike strengthened. This tracked carriage was very crowded, but with her domineering aura as an arbiter, she was able to easily pass through the crowd, head up to the upper deck, and find a seat. The carriage moved slowly, as Shio casually looked out the window when her gaze suddenly froze. She saw Sherman, who she hadn't been able to find anywhere. This young man, who thought himself as a woman, was carrying a paper bag with a few long loaves of bread and a stack of newspapers as he entered a narrow alley. His brown, shoulder-length hair had grown longer, and his gray patterned trousers seemed tighter. Although his figure disappeared almost as quickly as he appeared, making it impossible for the average person to notice, Shio, who was a sheriff, easily made the necessary judgment. Sherman stopped renting his place in Eastborough and moved here. Seeing that Sherman was fine and that she was still tracking her target, she held back her urge to jump off the carriage to chase after him, to ask him about his recent situation. Sherman carried the paper bag with several long loaves of bread and a stack of papers as he passed through alleys and streets, making a huge detour before entering an apartment building. He followed the cramped stairs to the third story, took out a key, and opened the door to where he lived. He seemed to possess some pretty good anti-tracking skills. With a creak, the door opened as Sherman's eyes lit up. He saw a lady wearing a black dress in front of him. This lady had a sweet, supple face and an impeccable figure, even while standing at the window and blocking out the sunlight, making herself become cloaked in the shadows. She seemed to be gilded, making her appear holy and beautiful.
Why are you here?
Sherman stared at her in surprise but couldn't help but size her up. His unobvious Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The next second, he turned his head and looked to the side as though he didn't dare look at her head-on.
Ma'am Trissy.
Sherman stammered a greeting. Trissy slowly smiled as she allowed the poorly lit room to appear to become brighter. Then, she asked with a teasing tone,
"Why don't you dare to look at me?"
I don't know, I like men. Why do I still have odd thoughts when looking at you?
Sherman continued looking at the ground to his side as he stammered an answer. Trissy's expression immediately turned mixed before smiling as though nothing had happened.
Females can also appreciate the charm of beauty within their gender.
She paused for a moment before saying,
I came here today because I have a mission for you. Your original progress has been very fast, leaving me very satisfied. But it seems like it has recently stopped.
Sherman's face immediately wore a look of horror, as he subconsciously took a step back.
I don't think there's a need to do such things.
Seeing Trissy silent, Sherman's gradually eloquently stringed his words.
I really don't wish to instigate others into stealing, robbing, and murdering. That's too evil, too despicable. Even at the very beginning, those people you got me to assassinate seemed to be a little overboard. Although they had indeed cursed me, beat me, ostracized me, and spread bad rumors about me, using all kinds of means to harm me in exchange for joy, their actions didn't require them to pay with their lives.
Unsurprised, Trissy smiled and said,
That's not what you said back then. You hated them and had wicked feelings for them. Once you obtained beyond your powers, you were so eager to seek revenge on them. I just made a tiny suggestion, and you planned several assassination missions. I always remember how you looked, stained with blood, trembling in excitement and fervor.
Sherman couldn't help but retreat as he heard that, until he was stopped by the door which had closed at some point in time. He then covered his face with his hands, shouting,
No! I have nightmares every night, dreaming of them surrounding me, covered in blood. They chase after me, bite me.
Ha! The paper bag fell to the ground as the long loaves of bread were scattered. The stack of newspapers happened to drop just beside them.
This is very normal.
Trissy cut off Sherman.
This is a necessary psychological change for an assassin. Think about it. Didn't you wish to kill them when they were bullying you?
Yes.
Sherman answered hesitantly. Trissy then chuckled.
Just treat it as self-defense when being bullied, thus killing them.
Her speech had a natural allure that made one wish to listen and believe. Sherman rapidly calmed down and nodded.
From this point of view, it does seem much better.
Upon hearing that, Trissy's dimples appeared as she teasingly added,
Besides, they weren't your match when they were alive, so what's there to be afraid of when they're dead? Even if they become ghosts or specters, it's nothing. You just need to seriously complete the ritual and consume one more potion, and then you'll be able to burn all those souls to oblivion.
But I can't bear seeing people turn ugly, crazy, and evil under my acts of instigation.
Sherman still seemed rather unwilling. Trissy indiscernibly curled the ends of her lips as she said with her smile maintained,
Those are evil thoughts they had to begin with. It has nothing to do with you. Even without you, those evil thoughts will erupt at specific moments and situations. Also, the missions I arranged for you are all related to the gangs. Aren't you most aware of what those people are like? Getting them to fracture and kill one another is mercy and kindness for people like you and the innocent people of Eastborough.
Sherman subconsciously widened his mouth, swallowing the words he was just about to say. He instantly fell silent. Sewell, Trissy's eyes swept past him and continued with a soothing voice.
You're just one step away from your target. As long as you complete the remaining ritual, you can drink the third potion to completely become a woman. When that happens, you can use the name Shermaine that you've already picked for yourself, What a nice-sounding name it is, isn't it? Then, you can leave Backland as a woman, heading for Mid-Seashore or Desi Bay, where you can begin a brand new life. You will no longer have anything to do with this place. Yes, you will definitely be filled with charm. Many excellent men will court you, and you can choose the one you like the most and are most satisfied with, walking down the aisle in a cathedral. You will have bubbly kids, and you can bring them up to be healthy children. You can bring them to Winter County for skiing, Desi Bay for holidays, and to the hunting grounds, which are pleasures that only nobles have. Didn't you say that you were willing to do anything to regain your true self?
Sherman's lips quivered, and after pursing them tightly for a while, he separated them and said,
Ma'am Trissy, I understand. I will proceed according to your instructions.
After saying that, he seemed to lose all his strength as he stumbled to the ground. He subconsciously reached out to hold onto a coat rack beside him. During this process, his gaze happened to sweep past the stack of newspapers. It had already spread apart, revealing a particular report. Tycoon from Desi, Mr. Dwayne Dantes, shows interest in purchasing the Larry Way Steel Company, believing that it has excellent profitability and a promising future.
Sir, are you really planning on buying Larry Way Steel Company?
And Nooney asked while walking upstairs at 160 Bachland Street. Dwayne Dantes shook his head and smiled. That news is just pure fabrication. I've only met the owner of the Larry Way Steel Company, Mr. Phil Larivi, at a ball last week and had a chat. By the side, Butler Walter heaved a sigh of relief as he warned,
Sir, the Larry Way Steel Company is indeed seeking a buyer. There are quite a number of people who are considering the option.
That also means that this piece of news was released by the reporters under Phil's instructions so that he can sell it at a better price.
Klein nodded in thought. He entered the room with the half-balcony and prepared to head up above the gray fog. He wanted to use Innie's praying point of light to see any abnormalities at Hazel's place. This was something that he had been doing daily for the past few days. Chapter 1000, Prelude. In the grand palace above the gray fog. Through Nooney's prayer point of light, Klein saw the scene inside his valet's room. As his vision pulled out and slowly extended out, he began taking in all of Bachland Street. Among buildings covered in fresh flowers and grass, Intis parasol trees that shielded the sunlight slowly swept past. There were slow-moving carriages that were elegantly or beautifully adorned, and youths dashing quickly on bikes. Finally, Klein locked on to Unit 39, Member of Parliament Mock's residence. He then lowered his field of view and began observing every animal and human to see if there was any black-haired, black-eyed, monocle-wearing man.
Phew, there's no switching or grafting of fate.
Nearly 10 minutes later, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, a carriage drove into Mock's residence and stopped at their doorstep. A young lady with curly black-green hair and bright, dark brown eyes alighted from a carriage. It was none other than Hazel, who had returned home. She was wearing a dark green dress that didn't expose her shoulders. Her lips were slightly pursed, and she wore a relaxed look with a hint of joy. Upon seeing Hazel in such a state, Klein's heart skipped a beat.
This was definitely abnormal. From my point of view, the rat demigod had only two outcomes after meeting Eamon's avatar. She either had a trump card and managed to escape successfully at the cost of being heavily injured, or she had turned into a Beyonder characteristic to strengthen Amon's avatar. And regardless of the outcome, there was no way Hazel could find her teacher. She would definitely be in grief and pain, feeling dispirited and sad. So how could she be relaxed and happy? With her taking the risk to head to the manor in the suburbs to inform her teacher, she's not a cold and selfish person. Her present state indicates that she has confirmed that her teacher, that rat demigod, is fine. She has even been rewarded, perhaps obtaining all kinds of knowledge about the supernatural world. This is in conflict with my theory of the rat demigod's outcome. No, it's not in conflict. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth.
Klein leaned back into his seat and came to a conclusion.
Aemon had not only obtained the rat demigod's Beyonder characteristic, but he had also stolen her fate and had replaced her identity.
After making the confirmation, Klein silently exhaled and felt a little relaxed.
Therefore, to Hazel, her teacher hadn't encountered any mishaps and would only need a period of time to lie low. To me, the most terrifying aspect of Eamon was that no one knew what form or identity he would use to appear. It could be possible that Member of Parliament Mocked would one day wear a monocle, or that insects in the garden would turn around with monocles on their faces. Therefore, after grasping the identity Amon might use to appear, I couldn't help but feel more assured. As for Eamon's performance being problematic in front of Hazel, I believe that it was impossible. After all, Eamon was a king of angels that was fundamentally good at deceit. Even if he mentioned something that differed from what the rat demigod had said, he could easily use the excuse of it being a test with what he now said being part of her formal education to fool her. Of course, based on Palez Zoroaster's depiction, Amon definitely wouldn't appear as a rat demigod, so I shouldn't be careless.
Klein did some observations before retracting his gaze and leaving the gray fog. Inside his room, he sat on a reclining chair and drank some black tea with a lemon slice. He half closed his eyes and considered how he could deepen his relationship with Kunas Kilgore. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly opened his eyes and activated his spirit vision. At the demigod level, he could already activate it at will. Almost at the same moment, Renette Tinneker walked out of the void with the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. One of them had a letter in its mouth. Klein asked, as he reached out his right hand.
Whose letter is it?
Renette Tinneker's other head answered,
Sharon.
Miss Sharon? She should be making her final preparations for the advancement. Why would she suddenly write to me?
Klein was slightly puzzled as he received the envelope. After he opened it, he found very little content. There was only a simple line. Emlyn White is seeking out the Rose School of Thought.
Emlyn is seeking out the Rose School of Thought?
Klein pricked up his brows in surprise.
My opinion of Emlyn was a sanguine who was afraid of trouble. Unless necessary, I didn't even wish to head out. So how could he actively search for the Rose School of Thought? This definitely isn't Emlyn's own will. Yes, Emlyn had mentioned that some important figure of the sanguine was meeting him. This is a new mission that the sanguine gave him. It's very possible. However, why didn't he mention it in the Tarot Club? Oh, it was focused on the punishment operation, and he had other clues, so he temporarily kept it from us.
Klein thought as he leaned forward. Under the watch of Miss Messenger's 8 eyes, he took out a piece of paper and a fountain pen from his coffee table.
I wasn't curious about Emlyn's clues, because it was an obvious matter. Since Miss Sharon knew that Emlyn was seeking out the Rose School of Thought and had asked our mutual friend, Detective Sherlock Moriarty, about this matter, it meant that this sanguine had likely asked the help of the black market arms dealer Ian from the Bravehearts Bar. This also meant that, in Emlyn's previous commissions, he must have noticed Sharon or Merrick. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to mention the Rose School of Thought to an ordinary person. I don't know enough about the apothecary pathway. I can't determine how Emlyn discovered a wraith or zombie.
Klein crossed his right leg as he placed the letter on his thigh and began scribbling.
This is likely a mission the Sanguine's upper echelons gave Emlyn. They hate the Rose School of Thought members who believe in the primordial moon, and they have directed this anger at the other factions of the Rose School of Thought.
Upon writing this, Klein paused and added,
I suspect that the Mother Tree of Desire has the intention of encroaching onto the authority of the Moon Domain, but I'm unsure why the primordial moon believers would join the Rose School of Thought. This secret existence seems to have a very complicated relationship with the Mother Tree of Desire. They are at odds, but they have also cooperated. It's hard to tell.
Putting down his pen and folding the letter, Klein looked at Miss Messenger, who had been waiting. He asked with a chortle,
How did you know that I'll be replying?
One of Renette Tinneker's heads succinctly answered,
Inkling.
Right on the heels of that, the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads spoke one after another.
You seem a little livelier recently. Your expression has also become much richer.
As Klein pulled out the box that was connected to his golden pocket watch, he took out a gold coin from it and said with a self-deprecating smile,
Repeatedly wearing a thick mask isn't good for one's mental health. I realized that after becoming a demigod.
Therefore, unless he was in situations where he needed to disguise or hide his feelings, he limited the use of his clown's power to control his emotions. Renette Tinneker didn't say a word as the heads bit on the gold coin and letter before vanishing. Watching Miss Messenger leave, Klein leaned back slightly and inwardly muttered,
I wonder if Miss Sharon and Merrick will use the Sanguine to deal with the Rose School of Thought members in Backland. Miss Sharon is probably focusing her time and efforts on her advancement. She might not involve herself, but I can't be sure about Merrick.
Emlyn changed into his Church of Earth Mother priest robes and then wore a red coat and a silk hat before walking out the Harvest Church. He then got into a rental carriage by the roadside. After saying his destination, he casually cast his gaze out the window. At this moment, Emlyn sensed something as he abruptly moved his body, leaving shadowy afterimages in his wake as he moved to the side. Then, he saw a figure appear out of nowhere. It was a young man whose coat wasn't buttoned, revealing the white shirt and black vest within. His brown hair was a little moist and messy, as though he hadn't combed it in a while. His brown eyes were filled with temperance, as though he was restraining certain urges deep within his heart. Upon seeing this pale, corpse-like face, Emlyn tipped his chin and said with a smile, showing no signs of nervousness,
You have finally come.
The young man's figure turned somewhat transparent.
Aren't you afraid that I'm a member of the Rose School of Thought that's here to finish you off?
Emlyn scoffed and said,
Would I not be aware of the Rose School of Thought's history, or matters about the betrayal of the Temperance faction and their escape? Well, how do I address you?
The young man replied,
Marek.
Emlyn was taken aback as he tsked.
Is this the information you received from the upper echelons of the Sanguine? No, or Chi, you are smarter than I thought.
He used such a remark to confirm the other party's guess. Merrick slowly drew a breath and leaned forward slightly.
How did you notice our existence from Ian's side?
Emlyn leisurely leaned back into the carriage and said with a smile,
Humans have the smell of humans. Wraiths have the smell of wraiths.
Merrick fell silent for a few seconds before asking,
You Sanguine wish to deal with the Rose School of Thought members in Backland?
The important members.
Emlyn replied by making an emphasis.
If that's the case, we can use ourselves as bait to help you fish out the Rose School of Thought members. However, I need confirmation.
Merrick rubbed his eyes and said directly,
I know you are unable to make the decision. You can first return to seek permission from the Sanguine. After you obtain their assurance, you know where to find us.
Having said that, he handed a dossier in his hand.
This is from Ian. It's the initial feedback from tracking Ernest Boyar. Many bounty hunters have completed this together.
Emlyn received the dossier and nodded in a rare look of solemnity.
Okay.